response that we would get wouldn't probably be the best of what we were expecting, and just to be prepared for it. And so I felt like I needed to, whatever I said to her, that I really, had to come from my heart, because I wouldn't be able to reach her, and it was about, trying to get her to see, how it's affecting other people, about her going around sort of just blatantly stealing off people, and people, that work really hard.
Sure. And people can be scornful of these processes, but something great came out of it.
Yeah, but something really great came out of it. And by the end of the meeting, she was able to look me in the eye, and we had a really great conversation, and we found out that she was really interested in hospitality, and she loves cooking, and she's a young girl of 15. And I said, oh, well, would you like to, come to Deluxe Diner and work? I would give you a job if you really, love the industry. I'd be more than happy to employ you.
And you have?
Well, we're still waiting for her to come to us, because she's still in a restorative justice process, and so we're just waiting for them to come forward to us. So it's all sitting there waiting.
Oh, fantastic.
The process is underway, yeah.
That's great of you, and it's a heartwarming story, and it must make everyone in the diner feel good. Are they all pleased? Yeah,
it's really, really neat, because a lot of other great things come out of it, because, Facebook's a powerful thing, so I put it up on Facebook about what had happened, and I had that day I had a couple of people come in and put $10 in, and then I had a guy turn up on his little Vespa motorbike, and he put $30 in. And so over the 2 weeks prior to it, we had, continuous people donating into our tip jar, and I think we got it like $180 for the staff. It was really wonderful.
Oh, it's a fantastic outcome, and well done, and thank you for and all the best with the employment, and let's hope it goes swimmingly.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's Cherie Bailey at the Deluxe Diner.
Respect to Cherie. How cool is she for offering that girl a job, giving her a second chance? That's just awesome.
Yes, that is awesome. The Fortune Theatre in Dunedin's closed down, as we know. Props are being offered for sale. One of them is a coffin. And the auctioneer, John Moore, says it won't be the first time he's had a coffin under the hammer. The seller of the first coffin at one of his auctions then asked for it back because a relative died and he needed it again. Would you buy a coffin either for your own future use or just to have around the house?
Well, nothing like buying it now. It's got to be cheaper than it will be, when I pop my clogs.
It'll never be cheaper than now.
Exactly, yes.
I'm just asking you. The props are on display at the theatre tomorrow and Friday, and the Otago Daily Times reports they included an historic-looking defibrillator and a skeleton. Having a real skeleton in your closet would be something.
That's the only place to put it, really, isn't it?
And another auction to mention, in West Otago, a chap named Brendan Stewart had the bright idea of making money for charity by selling off Tapanui's old street signs. And the proceeds will go towards leukemia treatment in Auckland for a local 14-year-old boy called Jock Davies. And they'd hoped to make $1,000. They raised more than $16,000.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
$500.
Brilliant.
A lot of places could do this, wouldn't you? Like an old street sign in your house?
I might have one, maybe.
From your student days?
Possibly.
Alan Blackman, Paula Penfold, thank you both so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
And thank you for your company, everybody. We're back tomorrow. Here's Checkpoint.
Tō te mairai hoa mā he kōrero kei te haere he kaupapa kei te karawhia. Well, welcome to Checkpoint tonight. 6 people dead in a head-on collision in South Taranaki. Our reporter is there. We hear from the police officer in charge and from the local community. Toi tū te kupu, toi tū te mana, toi tū te whenua. Koro Wetari, a man who knew that and believed that, is farewelled. We are there. We speak to the chairman of the Royal New Zealand Ballet, a development in the murder conviction of Gail Maney, Auckland's coldest night in 3 years. I know the rest of the country thinks we're soft, but it really was cold. Are Wallabies spreading in the south and cracking down on loan sharks and the fees and interest they charge? All of that coming up.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Anna Thomas. 6 people have died, including a newborn baby, and 2 other people are in a critical condition after a 2-car crash in South Taranaki. Police say it's clear the vehicles collided head-on on State Highway 3 at the bend on Ihupuku Road in Waverley this morning. 4 elderly people travelling north in 1 car died at the scene, as did the male driver and baby who were travelling south in the other car. An 8-year-old girl has been flown to Waikato Hospital and a woman has been airlifted to Wellington, both in a critical condition from that car. The road policing manager, David White, says the crash is devastating.
What happened this morning at Waverley is an absolute tragedy on our roads. 6 people have lost their lives and others are in hospital. That this happened on a day like today is just unbelievable and just devastating for those involved.
Inspector David White says the scene was deeply traumatic to witness and first responders will be offered support. And a witness to the crash, Brian Martin, says the corner where the accident occurred is a dangerous one.
That is a dangerous corner, that corner there. A lot of people don't really slow down, and if you're coming from the other way you can get across the road, and if a vehicle was passing the other vehicle on the left hand side and the other one was coming around the corner, they could quite easily have a head-on accident there.
Witness Brian Martin. RNZ has uncovered new details of the government's Dole for Apprenticeship scheme, costing up to $60 million a year. The government has today announced it will make it easier to bring in construction workers from overseas and scrap its KiwiBuild visa. Alongside the announcement, it presented an action plan to address the 30,000 worker shortfall. However, redacted information provides details of its Dole for Apprenticeship scheme aimed at encouraging unwilling employers to take on trainees. It reveals initial cost estimates will be between almost $13,000 to almost $16,000 per person per year. That's an annual cost of between $51 and $63 million. A US federal judge has ruled that immigration agents can no longer separate immigrant parents and children caught crossing the border from Mexico illegally and must work to reunite those families that have been split up in custody. The ruling by US District Judge Dana Sabraw in San Diego came in a lawsuit filed over the family separations by the American Civil Liberties Union. Donald Trump issued an executive order to end the family separations last week, but the government has yet to reunite about 2,000 children with their parents. The Ombudsman has ruled that Immigration New Zealand was right to hold Indian students responsible for false financial information on their study visa applications. Hundreds of Indian students have been refused further visas or ordered to leave the country because of the fraud. Lawyer Alistair McClymont complained to the Ombudsman on behalf of the 26 students. He says agents use false information without the students' knowledge because it's quicker than using real documents.
So a lot of these students who have arrived here have discovered that fraudulent false information was submitted by the agent. Their original genuine documentation was discarded, and now they are having visas declined, they're being deported, and now the Ombudsman has concluded that they have no right of appeal, review or consideration. They just have to suck it up.
Alistair McClymont says students affected by the problem have either returned to India or remained in New Zealand illegally. People have said their final goodbyes to the former Maori Affairs Minister Koro Weteri, who was buried today in Te Kuiti. More than 500 gathered at Turanga Waiwai in Ngaroa Wahia this morning for a funeral service for Mr Weteri, who died of cancer on Saturday. Koro Weteri was the MP for Western Maori electorate for 27 years. That seat turned into what's known today as Te Tai Hauauru, which is now held by his nephew, Labour MP Adrian Rurafi.
Uncle Koro, he made such a significant contribution at so many different levels across a whole spectrum of areas, including the Kingitanga, the Ratana Church, the Labour movement. Everything that he did had a purpose, and it's quite daunting to follow in those footsteps.
Adrian Rurafi says his uncle will be missed. Air New Zealand has been fined $16 million by an Australian court for price fixing between 2002 and 2007. The federal court ordered Air New Zealand to pay the penalties after the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission launched legal action against a global air cargo cartel for unfairly reducing competition. The fines cover fuel surcharges imposed on cargo from Hong Kong to Australia and insurance and security surcharges from Singapore to Australia. A controversial new billboard for bacon is being dumped after it raised eyebrows with connotations to underage sex. One of the new slogans by Beehive Bacon said, "I'm 15, he's 27, my parents love him. Wake up and smell the bacon." Jonathan Mitchell reports.
The Chief Executive at the National Council for Women, Jill Greer, says the billboard is sending the wrong message and is not reflecting family values. The slogans were created by Contagion. Its Chief Executive, Dean Taylor, says it's devastated the slogan has caused offence and will be pulling it down tonight. He says the other billboards will stay in place. Call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
It's 5:06. The All Blacks captain Kieran Reid has come through his first game of rugby in 7 months unscathed. Reid returned to the playing field for Counties Manukau in a warm-up match ahead of the provincial competition after having back surgery late last year. The last time he played in a Counties Manukau jersey was in 2004 in a development side. He says while he didn't know the names of many of his teammates today, it didn't detract from the game.
A few bros and cousins, from my point of view, didn't quite know all the names, but today really was just to go out, get a bit of contact, take a few hits, make some tackles, and really just enjoy the game. So got through all that, and no adverse effects in the body, so really happy with that.
Kieran Reid says he hopes to return to Super Rugby for the Crusaders off the bench in their match against Highlanders in Christchurch next week. The last 16 places are up for grabs at the Football World Cup in Russia overnight. Brazil need at least a draw against Serbia in Group E to guarantee a place in the knockout stage, while their opponents must beat the five-time champions to qualify for the last 16, as a draw would leave them relying on Costa Rica to comfortably beat Switzerland. And defending champions Germany ideally need to beat South Korea in their final group match to advance. Mexico plays Sweden, needing a point to be certain of making the last 16 in an unpredictable group where all 4 teams still have a mathematical chance of qualifying. And that's the news.
The proof is in the pudding? What is this, a cooking show or what? If you have a nice proof, no mathematical equations and watch out, it is the new theory of relativity.
Nights, Monday to Fridays, after the news at 7.
You want to put it in pudding, Einstein?
On RNZ National. And we're taking a broad brush to any developing issues and current affairs after the news at 10.
Look, all I would say is that there's plenty of room for everyone at this party. You know what I mean?
Lately, with me, Brian Crump, filling in for Karen Hay, part of Nights on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Western areas from Northland to Manawatu, including Taumaranui and Taihape, mainly fine. A few showers in western Northland spreading elsewhere tomorrow. And the remainder of the North Island fine with frosts tomorrow morning. For all the South Island except southern Fiordland, Clutha and Southland, mainly fine and frosty, a few areas of cloud. For southern Fiordland, Clutha and Southland, as well as the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. RNZ National, it's 5:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And with Anna Thomas. Thank you, Anna. Welcome everyone. We begin tonight with the terrible collision in South Taranaki. 6 people are dead, 1 of them a baby, and 2 are critically injured, 1 of them a child. 4 of the dead are understood to have been a group of elderly people travelling together in a car heading north from Waverley on State Highway 3. It does appear the 2 vehicles collided head-on. The driver of the southbound car heading towards Waverley was killed, along with a newborn baby. An 8-year-old girl sitting in the back and a female front seat passenger were critically injured and taken to Wellington and Waikato hospitals. Anne-Marie May reports.
The police say it appears 2 vehicles collided head-on at a bend near Ihupoka Road. Carol Ball lives in the Waverley area and wasn't too far from the crash when it happened.
we just heard a bang, and I looked over and saw a lot of dust. I thought it was a truck had dropped a bag of cement off. It was just like a whole lot of dust going up. And then my partner said, "Oh, there's been an accident." And then everybody came straight after that.
Carol Wall's partner, Red Martin, says initially he did not think the crash was too serious.
Oh, it was just a light crash, really, just a light thud. It didn't sound like a big crash at all. And we looked over and there was a vehicle parked up against the sign and there was steam coming out of it.
Red Martin says he saw a mower travelling along State Highway 3 shortly before the crash.
The mower had gone round that corner and I think the vehicle at the back was still sort of on that corner, and then what I think happened is a car's come along and tried to overtake that last vehicle and had a head-on accident with something else.
The head of road policing in the Central Districts area, Inspector Dave White, could not elaborate on whether there had been a mower on the road, but he says the scene was absolutely horrific. Mr White says 4 elderly people who were travelling north in one of the cars died as a result of the impact or soon after.
The car heading into Waverley contained a male driver who's deceased, a front seat passenger who is in hospital, an 8-year-old in the back seat who was in hospital, and an infant in a car seat who is also deceased.
David White says the death toll from the crash could rise as the 2 people airlifted to hospital were in a very serious condition when they left. The 8-year-old girl has been taken to Waikato Hospital and the woman to Wellington. He says with so many people being killed, support will be arranged for the emergency services staff who attended the crash.
A lot of our staff have young families and having to deal with that is not pleasant, but our thoughts are with their family first. They are the ones that have actually lost the baby.
David White says it is too early to say if speed was a factor in the crash, as the investigation is still in the very early stages. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Today's crash is the worst on New Zealand roads since a minivan carrying tourists slammed into a timber truck near Morrinsville in 2005, 13 years ago. 9 people died in that collision. South Taranaki Mayor Ross Dunlop says today's 6-person fatality is deeply upsetting.
Bloody awful. We started the day, a beautiful sunny day, things were going along really well, and then got the call about this terrible accident. 6 good people in our community. It's just unbelievable, and obviously our heart goes out to the families and everyone involved. Yeah, no, it's terrible.
Mayor Dunlop, you say in our community, do you have any sense that they are in fact locals?
We're still trying to obviously there's a lot of work going on. We've been contacting emergency services, but to get the details, no, we haven't got any detail around who has been in this tragedy. So that's the worry as well, just who it is, because there's obviously some families out there that are needing support.
Yeah,
wherever they've come from. Yeah.
Do you know the stretch of road? You would, wouldn't you? You'd drive along
Yeah,
a bit.
I know really well. Yeah, no, it's. I was down through there yesterday, and yeah, it's actually a relatively good road. From Hawara to Wanganui, there's been a lot of work done on the roads in that area, and so it's not an area that would have sort of stood out as a hot spot. Although there is a bit of a bend, quite a sharp bend that you do have to be a little bit cautious about. But who knows? Who knows why?
Very clear, very cold, very blue morning. Did you notice ice on the road when you were out and about this morning?
I was out shifting some stock and my hands were totally frozen. I was wishing I'd taken some gloves with me. So yeah, it was a very clear, cold morning, but a beautiful morning. And not a morning you would think there'd be such a significant tragedy in our community. Things were looking pretty good at the start of the day, I can tell you.
Yeah, obviously terrible and heartbreaking beyond description for the families, but also a lot of the first responders, the St John's people and the Volunteer Fire Brigade, they would be locals and they're volunteers, and they will have seen something that will be hard for them to forget.
Yeah, so they also are going to need a lot of support. Yeah, and you're right, they're volunteers. They do this because they care about the community. And we want to be supporting them as well. So yeah, there's a lot of ramifications for a tragedy like this. We had a similar situation a number of years ago on the Normanby Strait, north of Hawara, and boy, did that went through our community. It was unbelievable the amount of people that were and somehow affected by that tragedy. So, yeah, this is going to require a lot of support.
It's South Taranaki Mayor Ross Dunlop speaking to us a short time ago. Our Taranaki reporter, Robin Martin, is live at the scene and joins us now live via live view. Thanks, Robin. We really appreciate you being with us. Gosh, it's a beautiful evening there. That's the road behind you, obviously, State Highway 3. Has it reopened yet?
No, John. About 500 metres up behind me, the crash scene is still under investigation and still being cleared. At the press conference at 3:30, we were told an hour and a half, so obviously they haven't hit that target.
Robin, anyone looking will see that there is a bend there, but it is fairly gentle. Some speculation about ice on the roads, although it was late morning. And some talk, I think at that media conference, you might have asked this question, that a mower might have been working in the verges. Was that the case? Do we know any more about that?
The reason I asked that was because one of the witnesses up on the hill, I think it was Red Martin and his partner Carol Ball, they were out shoeing horses, and they kind of caught a part of what transpired there. And he remembers mowers going through earlier in the day. Right. But really, it's not particularly clear on whether that happened at the same time. And the police officer who you've spoken to or seen, he said it was too early to speculate. What I've asked a couple of truck drivers here and a couple of farmers about the state of the road, and a truck driver, Robert Clegg, came through here this morning at about 9. He said really ice and slippery road conditions shouldn't have been a factor. Drives through here all the time. It's an 85 speed limit kind of cambered corner, if you like. So everyone is quite puzzled as to how this tragedy unfolded.
And just before we leave you, Robin, it's absolutely been confirmed this was a head-on collision.
That's what the police have told us, and that's all I've heard has confirmed that viewpoint. Yes.
Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin live at the scene. Very, very clear there. Some talk about ice, although Robin's saying a truck driver he spoke to who had been on the roads in the morning is discounting that as a possibility. Clearly the police investigations are ongoing. If we hear any more about the identity of those involved or where they're from, we will report that before the end of Checkpoint tonight. It's 5:17. Thank you for being with us. RNZ has uncovered fresh details of a dole for apprenticeship scheme starting next year, costing $60 million annually. The details are part of an action plan aimed at encouraging unwilling employers to take on apprentices and tackle the skills shortage in the construction industry. Now, the plan was released today when the government announced it will make it easier to bring in construction workers from overseas, but RNZ has found hidden details, including preliminary costings and plans to recruit thousands of people currently on the dole. Tom Furley reports.
The government has scrapped its Kiwi Build visa plans that it campaigned on in favour of a special skills shortage list. It hopes to address the huge shortage of construction workers estimated at 30,000. It will speed up the process to fill jobs with migrants in areas where there are no local workers. As part of its announcement today, it included an action plan to build up local skilled workers and expand the sector. That plan included redacted information about the Dole for Apprenticeship scheme, which caught the Minister for Immigration, Ian Lees-Galloway, off guard.
Are you aware that the Cabinet paper released today, the redacted parts are not in fact redacted?
No, I wasn't aware of that. Which Cabinet paper is this?
This is the Cabinet paper regarding today's announcement.
Okay.
What's your reaction to the fact hearing that there's...
that's less than ideal.
Under the preliminary plan, 4,000 people on the dole will be recruited as apprentices every year at a cost of between $12,750 and $15,750 per person per year. That's an annual cost of between $51 and $63 million, which will cover a wage subsidy and provision of wraparound supports. Employment Minister Willie Jackson says it will target young people on benefits.
We want to be optimistic. We want to support a lot of these young ones who've been lost. You know, we've been working very closely with them at regional level over the last few months, and we've got some good returns. So, you know, this is a priority for us, this Doles for Apprenticeship. But there are some negative connotations around the whole Dole banner. So I think we can come up with a good title that we'll let you know about in the next week or two.
The hidden details also show the scheme will be in place as soon as 2019-2020, provided funding is secured in next year's budget. The head of the Building and Construction Industry Training Organisation, Warwick Quinn, says it's a good idea, with only 10% of the industry taking on apprentices.
They see training as a barrier and a cost, particularly in the first 12 to 18 months where the new recruit takes time and effort and rework and isn't productive, and that any financial support that we give them is very important. And because our employers are the teachers, it's also a matter of equity, and that every other teacher in the country is paid directly and supported to teach. Yet in construction or in the training environment for employers, that's not the case.
Minister Ian Lees-Galloway also announced a specific Kiwi Build skills shortage list and an accreditation process for building firms to bring in migrant workers.
The current settings do work well, but they are not sufficient to meet the needs that this government has, because we have an ambitious program to build 100,000 houses over 10 years. We need to add another tool to the toolbox so that we can get the people we need.
The leader of the opposition National Party, Simon Bridges, says the government has taken too long to make migration easier.
Look, I think this is a rank hypocrisy by the government. For pure politics prior to the election, they were going to slash immigration. Immigrants were all the problem. We've always said, actually, you need sensible immigration for the skills and the capital that they bring. And now it seems very belatedly the government's come around to this.
Housing Minister Phil Twyford says it's always been Labour's policy to bring in workers from overseas. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
It's been revealed former Prime Minister Sir John Key lobbied the Forestry Minister on behalf of a US billionaire and 2 Northland iwi for their development to be exempted from a foreign buyer's ban. The exemption for the Te Arai development was included in the legislation, but was later struck out by the Speaker of the House. National has been vigorously pursuing Cabinet Minister David Parker over the issue, but it now appears one of their own was involved. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Tū iwi, Te Uri o Hau and Ngāti Manuhiri have done deals with New Zealand developer John Darby and US billionaire Rick Kane to build golf courses and luxury homes on coastal land brought with treaty settlements. In his submission on the legislation, Mr Kane said the exclusive Taraiti golf course now employed 50 full-time workers and 30 part-timers and provided work for 100 contracted caddies. Sir John Key has played golf at the course, including with President Barack Obama when he visited in March. In Parliament this afternoon, the Forestry Minister Shane Jones told the House he'd been lobbied by someone associated with the Te Arai development. Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters asked who the concerned local citizen was. Mr Jones replied that he went to a meeting at the Taraiti golf course, which used to be Crown Forest land.
Present at that meeting were members from the Te Uri o Hau Hapu, Mr John Darby, and the US billionaire, Mr Rick Kane. I'm disappointed that the latter's name has been traduced by the opposition in the House. I had never heard of the man's name until I was encouraged to meet him by the former Prime Minister, Right Honourable John Key.
Shane Jones said he got a call from John Key earlier this year and didn't think there was anything improper about meeting with the group. The minister responsible for the Overseas Investment Office, David Parker, then popped up.
So let me get this straight.
Order. Question.
Is the minister saying that after all of the spurious and defamatory accusations levelled against me and the government by the opposition, that the Right Honourable Sir John Key had been making representations on behalf of Te Arai for help before I even knew about it?
National's Jerry Brownlee objected to David Parker's question, arguing it was not a question at all but an allegation.
Well, what this House concerns itself with is potential for corrupt practice, and that is the essence of what is at stake here. This sort of question, this self-justifying sort of question, does not do anything to improve the integrity of this House.
After a number of arguments about wording, Mr Parker asked whether Sir John Key had been lobbying on behalf of Te Arai before he became aware of the issue. Shane Jones replied that he was just doing his job.
When a former Prime Minister, who I've got quite a bit of time for, rightly or wrongly, encouraged me to make contact with a fine investor, in my view, Mr Rick Kane, and associated parties, I had no qualms in doing that whatsoever.
Jerry Brownlee asked Shane Jones whether he made representations to the Cabinet after the meeting.
I made my concerns about compensatory treaty land known to Mr Parker. That is not the only block of Māori land that people have referred to me that is caught up with our universal and blanket ban.
Shane Jones says he's absolutely not trying to allege there's something improper in Sir John Key approaching him. He says quite the opposite in fact. But this has thrown a spanner in the opposition's push to target David Parker and the government over the exemption. Atu i te whare pāri mata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
25 minutes past 5. A grandfather of the people, a Maori leader of the highest esteem. These are some of the ways people have remembered the former Maori Affairs Minister, Koro Weteri, who was buried today in Te Kuiti. More than 500 people gathered at Turanga Waiwai and Narawa Wahia this morning for a funeral service for Mr Weteri, who died of cancer on Saturday, the day after his 83rd birthday. Our Māori news correspondent, Lee Marama McLaughlin, was there.
Lining the pathway at Turanga Waiwai Marae, Kai Karinga in black wearing taua or crowns of leaves mourn the loss of Koro Weteri. His tūpapaku was carried down the path, meeting a chorus of men with taiaha before leaving the marae. The crisp, cold morning started with church, followed by a hakari, where a huge spread of oysters, hangi, boil-up and other kaimoana was served for breakfast. The funeral service was held in the marquees outside. Tuku Morgan from the Kingitanga paid the final tribute.
You will never be forgotten, because you will always be a father for all of us of Kingitanga and of Ratana.
More than 1,500 people poured through the marae over the past few days for the tangihanga. Mr Weteri's cousin Tom Roa says he was a giant in politics and a personable man.
He would spend time with kings, queens. Nelson Mandela comes to mind, Bishop Tutu, but he had no difficulty in coming to the back of the kitchen and sitting with people, even picking up a potato and peeling it.
Koro Weteri was the MP for the Western Māori electorate for 27 years. That seat turned into what's known today as Te Tai Hauauru, which is now held by his nephew, Labour MP Adrian Rurafe.
Uncle Koro, he made such a significant contribution at so many different levels across a whole spectrum of areas, including the Kingitanga, the Ratana Church, the Labour movement. Everything that he did had a purpose, and yeah, it's quite daunting to follow in those footsteps.
Alistair Ferris served Mr Weteri as his senior private secretary when he was the Minister of Māori Affairs in the 1980s.
Koro was one of those people, you know, old school, and he was a man of integrity, a man of his word, very much a family man. Often, Girlie, his wife, Mrs Weteri, would come into the office and his kids would pop into the office.
The Ratana Church's infamous brass band played today. Band leader Perenara Ririnui says Mr Weteri was a man of many talents, and as a registered apostle of the Ratana Church, he joined people in marriage.
He married a few, and one of the most famous was Mike Moore from Parliament. He was Minister for the Labour Party. I think he might have been even the leader of the Labour Party at some stage. So he married Mike Moore. After
spending some time at Oparure Marae near Te Kuiti, Koro Weteri's body was buried at a whānau urupa. He is survived by his wife, 5 children and many mokopuna. 2 other bodies had been lying in state alongside Mr Weteri, Parehi Kairo Fata and Inia Te Wiata, who were also buried today at Taupiri. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Lee Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
You are with with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up, a development in the murder conviction of Gail Maney, the private investigator who led the effort to overturn Taina Porter's rape and murder convictions, offers to take another look into Maney's case. The chairman of the Royal New Zealand Ballet on Director Francis Turner's resignation and what's been going on with the company. Auckland's coldest night in 3 years. We'd love your feedback. Do text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Facebook, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. In 2 seconds from 1 second, right, it's 5:30.
Exactly.
And here is the 5:30 headlines with Anna Thomas. Thanks, Anna.
6 people, including a newborn baby, have died and 2 others are in a critical condition after a head-on collision in South Taranaki. Police say the crash happened on State Highway 3 at the bend on Ihupuku Road in Waverley this morning. All 4 people in one car died at the scene, as did the male driver and baby in the other car. An 8-year-old girl and a woman are in hospital in a critical condition. RNZ has uncovered new details about the government's Dole for Apprenticeships scheme, which could cost up to $60 million a year. Alongside today's announcement to make it easier to bring in foreign construction workers, the government presented an action plan to address a 30,000 worker shortfall. Edited out details have revealed the initial cost of a scheme to encourage unwilling employers to take on trainees will be up to $16,000 per person per year. A group of Indian students has lost an appeal to the Ombudsman over being deported or refused visas because of false financial information in their study visa applications. Judge Bosher says Immigration New Zealand will consider new applications by 3 of the complainants and reconsider the cases of 7 others. However, he has raised questions about how much analysis immigration officers undertook before declining applications on character grounds. A controversial new billboard for bacon is being dumped after it raised eyebrows with the connotations of underage sex. One of the new slogans by Beehive Bacon said, "I'm 15, he's 27, my parents love him. Wake up and smell the bacon." The chief executive of the National Council for Women, Jill Greer, says the billboard is sending the wrong message and is not reflecting family values. The slogans were created by Contagion, whose chief executive says the company is devastated the slogan has caused offence and will pull it down tonight. Aucklanders churned through enough power to light up 450 Mount Eden rugby parks last night as temperatures in the city plummeted. The mercury dipped to -0.9 degrees, the coldest it's been in the city in 3 years. Ain't that the truth?
It was a cold night. We are receiving correspondence from people saying you know nothing about cold.
No, and we don't, really.
No, although given the extent of the housing crisis in the city, it is a story that... Anyway, thank you, Anna Thomas. Appreciate it. Nona, it's been a tough old day today, Nona Peltier, and so I'm hoping for some cheer in the business news about the Serious Fraud Office and the Reserve Bank are investigating CBL insurance. Gosh, we've talked about CBL a bit, haven't we? And
it's never getting any better, is it? The news is always more of the same. And unfortunately, now the Serious Fraud Office has joined the other regulators in looking at this company. So they're cooperating with each other, but these are separate investigations, and it's quite serious. I mean, if the Serious Fraud Office is looking at it, the Financial Markets Authority, the Reserve Bank, there's court action. It's not a nice picture. And what do we know? Not much, I'm afraid.
No.
I hate to say this, but we really are only learning about the investigations, but not the details, and no one's talking.
The Serious Fraud Office tend not to talk.
But the Reserve Bank isn't either. The Financial Markets Authority are going to go to court to ask for a ruling on disclosure regarding when a company is put into administration, voluntary administration or whatever kind of administration, to find out what the regulations are regarding disclosure. Because really, a listed public company, a shareholder would expect to get some level of disclosure, but there's been very little disclosure about what's been going on, and that's been the case for some time now. So it's going to be a big case. I think we're going to see this unfold for some time. Where things are at, nobody really knows.
Right, we look forward to the update at some stage, Nona. A Hart family business, that's Graham Hart, super rich dude. Walter and Wild has bought Hubbard Foods, Hansel's Food Group and Greg's Table Sauces. What are the details?
Now, it's Harry Hart. This is Graham's son.
Right.
He's the principal owner of this company. Walter and Wild, and Graham has a stake in it. So
Right.
just to clarify that it obviously runs in the family and being entrepreneurial. Anyways, Harry Hart, he's bought this company now, not just one company, he's bought 3. And these are companies that are well-known brands in New Zealand. We've got Hubbard's Food, Hubbard Foods, Hansel's Food Group, and Greg's
Hansel's,
table
I reckon
sauces.
Hansel's, our listeners my age and older will remember they made a ready mixed drink that was very much part of my childhood. I don't know whether it was Tang, but it was something like Tang, I'm sure of it. And also I remember they sponsored the women's cricket when I was a kid, and it was the first time I think a corporate sponsor had got behind women's cricket, so I've always had a soft spot for that.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah,
I did not know
they may be
that.
false
I did
recollections.
not know
well,
that.
neither thing is relevant,
And
you
know,
don't have to know them.
And that company had gone into foreign ownership, so this is bringing it back to New Zealand. And Greg's table sauces was left on the table when Heinz Waddies bought some sauces. That was one that the Commerce Commission would let them hang on to, so that was on the table. And then Hubbard Foods, interestingly, Dick Hubbard, he said he was 71, wouldn't tell me how old his wife was, but they're the principal owners of that company.
That's not relevant either, Nona.
Well, I can't help it. He said it. He said they were ready to retire. But anyhow, he said that they had been looking to sell their company, and then suddenly they were given this offer, and, well, they did the deal in like 2 months. Anyways, I spoke with him a little bit earlier this afternoon, and we'll have a little bit from what he had to say.
Well, we always had in mind for the last year or so that we would be selling within the next couple of years, and we actually had in mind that it would probably be towards the end of this year. But we had some interest, and we felt it was appropriate to move. We have made enough breakfast cereal to fill, we estimate, about 3.5 billion bowls over the 30 years that we've been in business. We've made about 150,000 tonnes of cereal over 30 years. And we've had well over 150 different product lines go through the factory, and we make a very diverse range of cereals. And last but not least, we have a very, very dedicated staff in our company, and we've been very, very proud of them too.
Nice way to describe your staff, Nona. Dick Hubbard. What happened on the markets today?
Well, the market, we closed up nearly 7 points. That's pretty good. 8,997, still not quite to that 9,000 mark. The New Zealand dollar is trading a bit lower against the US dollar at 68.2 cents, and that's really because of all that trade confusion. 92.4 Australian and 51.5 British pence.
Nona Peltier with the business news. Thank you. The private investigator who led the effort to overturn Taina Porter's rape and murder conviction says the case of Gail Maney is fragile, and he's volunteered to take another look at it. Maney was jailed for her part in the 1989 death of Dean Fuller Sands. She's the focus of a new podcast called Gone Fishing, a joint production between RNZ and Stuff. She spent 15 years in prison but is still fighting to prove her innocence. And as Amy Mouse reports, private investigator Tim McKinnell has offered to look into Gail Maney's case.
Gail Maney's conviction was based on the testimony from witnesses who were interviewed 8 or more years after Dean Fuller Sands disappeared. During her trial, the Crown was unable to produce any hard forensic evidence, such as DNA, blood matches or weapons. Fuller Sands' body has never been found. Private investigator Tim McKinnell was a key figure in the quashing of Taina Porter's rape and murder convictions. McKinnell helped set up the New Zealand Public Interest Project about 2 years ago. That's a group of lawyers, investigators and forensic scientists who are trying to plug gaps in the way we deal with miscarriages of justice. McKinnell says, based on the evidence laid out in the podcast, the case appears to be fragile, and he says there are immediate red flags. He has also volunteered to look into Maney's case.
My first impression of the case is that it is fragile. In terms of the evidence, there's a lack of corroboration. There's very little in the way of independent evidence. There are concerns around some of the witnesses and their credibility and reliability. There are a number of wavering versions of events before a final version of events is settled on, and we've seen that in cases before where there isn't a clear narrative, and that changes and adjusts over a period of time before there is a settling on a particular version. So those sorts of things are concerning, and I have questions around the way that those statements and that evidence was collected over a period of time.
2 juries found Gail Maney guilty of commissioning a hit on Fuller Sands. The police said she thought Fuller Sands had burgled her home in August 1989, so she asked a nightclub doorman, Stephen Stone, to kill him. The Crown said Stone then killed Phyllis Sands in the garage at Mainie's home in front of 8 or more witnesses. But Mainie says she's innocent. She says she never even met her supposed victim. She believes that he in fact died after being swept off rocks while fishing.
When I was charged with murder on the 3rd of July 1997, that was the first time. That was the first time I'd heard the name Dean Fuller-Sandys. I've never met Dean, but I guess that in some ways he's kind of become part of my life because I've been accused of his alleged murder.
Former police officer Mark Franklin led the investigation into the death of Dean Fuller-Sands. He admits there was a lack of forensic evidence, but he says numerous witnesses gave evidence linking Mainie to Fuller-Sands and describing the murder at her house.
Dean Fuller-Sandys wouldn't be dead if it wasn't for Gail Mainie. Bottom line. She always denied it, but at the end of the day, you've got to look at the weight of the evidence from not just one witness, but 4, 5, 6 other witnesses, and a lot of peripheral evidence as well.
But McKinnell says there is a growing awareness of the dangers of relying on witness statements alone, especially from witnesses who have been shown to be liars.
Well, I've been doing this work for a little while now, and some of the behaviours and some of the red flags that we've talked about are things that I've seen before in wrongful convictions. And so for those reasons alone, I think you should never walk away from a case and say it's done and dusted, it's not worthy of closer examination. The other issue is that standards have changed a little bit in the last 20 years. So disclosure and the rules around offers, inducements and deals that are made, what is provided to Defence Counsel, those types of things have changed a little bit. And so that gives Gail, I think, some hope that there might be something sitting there that she hasn't seen yet that might be of value to her case.
In the case against Mainie and her co-accused Stephen Stone, key witnesses were granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for giving evidence. McKinnell says caution is required when a witness stands to benefit from giving testimony.
That's a fairly substantial carrot for a person who is at risk of being charged of a serious crime. If they're offered immunity, that is an inducement of sorts for them to cooperate. And we mustn't forget the position people are in on occasions when they're dealing with police. If they have done something wrong, either directly related to the crime that's being investigated or in another part of their life, they can be vulnerable in a psychological sense. And when an offer is made and it's a get-out-of-jail-free card, it can be fairly compelling.
Mainie, who is currently serving out her sentence on parole, has applied to justice groups like the Innocence Project New Zealand, and she hopes her case will be heard by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, due to be set up by the government mid-2019. McKinnell says she needs to consider what she does next. But regardless, she is in a position where there needs to be fresh evidence or something relatively compelling to advance her appeal. She can also apply for a royal prerogative of mercy.
It's not the end of the road for her. Gail does have options. She just needs to make some informed decisions about what she does next.
Tim McKinnell says he is willing to volunteer his time to look at Gail Mainie's case. For Checkpoint, this is Amy Moss.
You can hear the full podcast or check out our special Gone Fishing webpage on the RNZ and Stuff websites. It's coming up to 17 minutes to 6. Jungle Juice, Hansel's Jungle Juice. I knew you'd know. Excellent audience. Right, last year, claims of bullying emerged from dancers at the Royal New Zealand Ballet Company. They coincided with the departure of a significant number of the company's dancers. Over roughly a year, almost half either left or did not have their contracts renewed. Accounts of what happened have varied wildly. The RNZB itself rejected many of the accusations, but dancers, mostly speaking off the record, were adamant the culture was sometimes beyond robust. A former Deputy State Services Commissioner was asked to conduct a review of the company's policies and procedures for managing and responding to complaints by staff. He found few issues with the way the company handled allegations of bullying, but he made 11 recommendations, including additional training for staff, making some policies clearer and creating a blueprint for cultural, behavioural and performance expectations. That was released in March. The exodus of dancers has stemmed, although not ended since then. The company's production of Dancing with Mozart was received with glowing reviews. And whilst there's still a sense that having fewer than half of the company's dancers being New Zealanders isn't high enough for the Royal New Zealand Ballet, the company is looking to recruit. Just as if it looked like the waters were calm and the sailing was good, the company's executive director, Frances Turner, announced she was resigning to be with her family in Auckland. I spoke with the chairman of the board, Stephen Fife, about what did and didn't happen and the company's health on and off the stage.
We did receive complaints, as
all a matter of public record. And we took those very seriously, and that's why we had Mr. Craig undertake the independent review earlier in the year, and we've published all his findings. So he had a number of recommendations for things that we could do better, and we've accepted all of those. But importantly, he did find that we had treated the complaints seriously. We had policies that were fit for purpose, not perfect, and he's given us recommendations about how to make them better. But we did take the complaints seriously. One of his specific recommendations was that we engage more actively with our staff to actually together define the culture. So that's work that's going on. In fact, the workshops are taking place during June and July. And but the culture, it's a high performance. You know, we're in the performing arts. It's a tough profession, ballet. It's technically extraordinarily proficient. So it's a tough business to get right. We're always challenged for finances. We're always challenged with health and safety issues around theatres being open and closed. So it is high performance. So it has its stresses and strains. And I say the culture is to produce high quality work, to give your best at all times, and it's the classic teamwork environment. So I think we have a good culture, but it certainly can be. It needs to be continually worked on and improved.
Do you think you have a good culture? Because dancers are still leaving, aren't they?
Well, there's 3 dancers have left in the first half of 28, but there's always dancer turnover, and 3 leaving would not be unusual.
Absolutely. In terms of your dancers, and let's come back to the culture that we talked about, and you would have absolutely heard the interviews on Checkpoint, and you would have absolutely read the stuff that was online and in the newspapers. The dancers were saying they felt bullied, they felt intimidated, they felt constantly under threat and assessed in a way that was excessively robust, sometimes demeaning and sometimes pretty scary. Now, do you think the Royal New Zealand Ballet has moved on from that kind of management of their dancers?
Yeah. So firstly, I'll say that is an exaggeration of, I don't think that's a fair characterisation of the complaints we received in 2015, not 2016. We did get complaints, but they were not of the nature that you've just characterised.
Certainly I spoke to people who said that. I spoke to a number of dancers who said that. And in fact, they told me that they were prepared to say it to me off the record, but they were scared to say it on the record, and they were scared to say it to their employer.
Yeah. So, we certainly did get complaints. So we did get the voice of those, and it wasn't the way you've characterised it. There were elements of what you said that people complained of, but it wasn't of the level that you were talking about. But that's why we had the independent review. Said, well, how did we respond to those? And one way you could think about it is, are dancers attracted to the Royal New Zealand Ballet today? And they are. I mean, we have plenty of applications. We're inundated with people wanting to join that company. There is a high turnover in the ballet industry. As ballet careers are short, dancers want to dance for a number of companies. So I think the sign that there's no shortage of people wanting to join the New Zealand Ballet.
So you had a review.
Yeah.
In response to what the dancers were saying, and you wouldn't have had a review if the dancers weren't saying something, if the dancers weren't making allegations at some level about the culture within the Royal New Zealand Ballet. Was that a culture that operated under Francesco Ventriglia?
So when Francesco was here, we did receive complaints. We've been quite open about that. They were taken seriously. Doug Craig said in some ways we went probably a little bit overboard in terms of, in every case, we used external advisors and external advice to help us understand how to respond. He's actually suggested going forward we should do less of that and build the capability internally, which is a good idea. But I don't think the incidents made the culture excessively bad. It was not ideal in some respects, but overall I think the culture of the ballet company is good.
How many personal grievances have you had from company members in the past 12 months?
Personal grievance, I may not get the number. It's about 4, but I stand to be corrected, but it would be of that order.
And how many of those 4, and that's my understanding that is the number, in fact I was told that today, how many of those 4 have been upheld and have resulted in some kind of formal settlement, including a payout?
So of the 4 that one was withdrawn or not taken forward. So 3. So the 3 are all in mediation with professional. So the parties agreed that, and it's quite a normal process. So they're in the process of being mediated, and my understanding, and that mediation is underway right now. My understanding is 2 of the 3 have been concluded in mediation, and there's been a financial payment, largely for compensation of time and legal costs and that kind of thing.
So Stephen, so here you are, and I absolutely take you at your word, telling me the culture is fine, and telling me there are no issues, and telling me that my representation of it in the question I asked you earlier was an exaggeration, and I accept that we're going to agree to differ on that. But you're also telling me there have been 4 PGs, 1 of which has been withdrawn, 3 of which are ongoing, 2 have resulted, and 3 of which are ongoing with mediation, and 2 have resulted in some form of settlement. Now, you only have 30 dancers in your company. Is that consistent with a culture that is, as you are representing, well and healthy and constructive and good?
What I'm not able to tell you is the discussions that went on in mediation, and I wasn't part of it, so I only heard reports, but the nature of mediation. But what I think I can say is that the findings from mediation were that we did follow good process. The particular things that were the subject of the personal grievances were around the process by which dancers' contracts are renewed. They did not relate to allegations of bullying, or there was nothing of that nature. It was around contractual issues with contracts, because dancers, like sports people, are on contracts. So the matters were contractual and legal, and it was around how that was handled. My understanding was that it was felt that the ballet company had followed its policies pretty well, and the settlements amount to a compensation for time and cost. So I don't believe there were mediation doesn't produce findings per se, but there were no findings that we had not followed our policies or not followed correct procedure.
Why is Frances Turner leaving?
It's personal reasons, and it's to return to her family. Frances was effectively commuting, and I can assure you it's totally unconnected to any of the publicity we had. It's a personal decision by Frances, and we're actually very grateful that, given the media activity, that Frances is going to give us 9 months into 2018 just to ensure we have a smooth transition.
Highly regarded Frances. What was her relationship with Patricia Barker like?
Well, it's good. We have this twin chief executive role between the two, so it's very common in the arts, but not so common elsewhere, and it's very important the two of them get on very well, and they bring totally different strengths, and it's worked well.
I know that you have to go, and we really appreciate your time. One final question, and that is, do you believe this is a company to be proud of? On the stage, of course, but also, in the wings.
Oh, it was a bruising 2017, but I'm absolutely proud to be associated with the ballet company. We produce wonderful performances. We do wonderful things in the community that I'd love to be able to talk to you about one day, but I know that's not what we're talking about. And we're absolutely committed to make New Zealanders proud of us, and and many New Zealanders love the ballet company and buy our tickets and support us. So, I think New Zealanders can be proud of the ballet company.
Stephen Fife, Chairman of the board. It's now 3 days since 12 teenage boys and their football coach disappeared in a cave network in northern Thailand. Rescue crews have resumed their efforts to find the group after rising waters in the cave halted the search. This report from the BBC's Jonathan Head.
Weary and wet, rescuers trudged in and out of the cave for a third day without anything to show for it. They've got hundreds of people here now. The army is sending in squads to tramp through the rain-soaked hills in search of other ways into the cave complex. And there are volunteers with cave diving experience who've come to help, some from neighbouring countries. But the conditions underground are rough.
The distance is about 3 to 4 kilometres from the entrance. It's very hard and difficult for the divers because they're not able to see anything. The water is very murky, so they're not able to find the other side of it at this point.
Power lines are being fed into the caves, and they're assembling pumps, which they hope can lower the water levels faster than the incessant rain is raising them. Well, for those working here at the cave entrance, this has been a frustrating day with divers unable to make any further progress into the caves that way. But they do believe the boys are inside there alive, and they hope that they can climb up on top of these hills and reach them from channels further up. The families of the missing boys come and go, waiting and praying for good news. The weather and the terrain aren't helping, but this is a huge rescue operation now. It can't be that much longer before they find a way in.
Jonathan Head from the BBC. A Diamante encrusted horsehead statue full of cocaine in a manhunt that went on for over a year. Henry Anchondo's case had all the makings of a bad movie, really. Today at the High Court in Auckland, Anchondo admitted his part in a bungled attempt to get the cocaine in order to sell it on. Our reporter Edward Gay was in court, and Edward is beside me in the studio now. Hi, Eddie. Lovely to have you here as always. Anchondo was meant to pick up the cocaine at a fancy old downtown Auckland hotel, right?
Yeah, that's right. Henry Anchondo flew into New Zealand on a US passport in June 2016. He'd been put in touch with a fellow US passport holder, that's Ronald Cook Sr., and also Mexican Agustin Suarez, and he actually met the pair in the Crown Plaza Hotel where Ronald Cook Sr. and Augustine Suarez had a room booked. Cook met Anchondo in the hotel lobby, and he took Anchondo up to the room, but the deal never actually went ahead.
What went wrong?
Well, initially everything actually went to plan. This Diamante encrusted horse's head, weighing 336 kilograms, that had been sent to Mexico, landed from Mexico to Mangere in a storage warehouse in Mangere. Nearly 3 weeks later, Cook and Suarez landed in the country. They rented a house out in Te Aratu, out west, and they flew out to Hawaii after setting up that house and returned to the country about a month later on June 30. Cook and Suarez bought power tools at a local tool shop to try and break into this horse's head and get this cocaine out. And the meet with Anchondo was scheduled for the following day.
The police have been watching the whole time though, right, Eddie?
That's right. The horse actually contained 35 packets of rice risotto by this stage. One of the packages also had a tracking device hidden inside. Investigators and customs officers had been watching the storage shed. They'd been watching Cook and Suarez while they'd been in Auckland. Cook and Suarez took 5 of the packages to the room from Te Aratu to the Crown Plaza hotel room, and for this meet with Anchondo. And this cocaine, 5 packages, if it had been cocaine and not rice risotto, had a street value of between $1.25 and $2 million.
Rice risotto or risotto rice? Well, it had to be made, and someone made it.
It was, as I understand it, was still dry. But, so they were so unlucky, though, also, that one of the packages they took was the package with the tracker inside it. So they managed to pick that one out as well.
45 seconds of I stopped giggling, and Chondo disappeared.
Yeah, well, so this meet took place in the hotel, but when the package was opened up and they found the tracking device, everyone scarpered, everyone panicked. Suarez and Cook went off to the airport. They tried to flee the country. They were arrested in the departure lounge, and Chondo disappeared, and he went missing for over a year.
Amazing.
Finally arrested in Whangarei in September last year, and he is now due to be sentenced in August.
Edward Gay, brilliant work as always. Thank you very much indeed. It's coming up to 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Mayor of Taranaki says the community is in shock after a head-on crash killed 6 people this morning in Waverley. 4 elderly people in a car heading north on State Highway 3 and a man and a baby heading south in another car died just after 11 this morning. Police have not yet identified them publicly, and the South Taranaki Mayor Ross Dunlop told Checkpoint with John Campbell it's difficult not knowing who was involved.
That's the worry as well, just who it is, because there's obviously some families out there that are needing support.
Yeah,
wherever they've come from. Yeah.
Taranaki Mayor Ross Dunlop, a woman who was the front seat passenger in the southbound car, has been flown to Wellington Hospital with critical injuries, while an 8-year-old girl who was also in that car has been taken to Waikato Hospital. Our reporter Robin Martin is at the scene of the crash and has been talking to locals and drivers about the state of the road.
A truck driver came through here this morning at about 9. He said really ice and slippery road conditions shouldn't have been a factor. Drives through here all the time. It's an 85 speed limit cambered corner, if you like. So everyone is quite puzzled as to how this tragedy unfolded.
Robin Martin in Waverley. A line of 50 heavy trucks remains stranded either side of the highway. The police had hoped to open the road at 5 o'clock, but it's still closed. Cars and smaller commercial vehicles are able to use a detour. RNZ has uncovered new details of the government's Dole for Apprenticeships scheme, costing tens of millions of dollars a year. Today, the government announced it's making it easier to bring in construction workers from overseas and presented an action plan to address the shortfall of 30,000 construction workers. Redacted information provides details of the apprenticeship scheme to encourage unwilling employers to take on trainees. Initial cost estimates are almost $13,000 to almost $16,000 a person annually. That's a total cost of between $51 and $63 million a year. The Employment Minister, Willie Jackson, says it is a priority.
Young people who might be part of the NEETS crew, a lot of young people who are at the coalface not getting support, coming from families who are part of intergenerational unemployment. There's a lot there.
Willie Jackson. The hidden details show the scheme will be fully in place by 2019 to 2020 as long as funding is secured in next year's budget. The Forestry Minister, Shane Jones, says he was lobbied by the former Prime Minister, Sir John Key, on behalf of a US billionaire and 2 Northland iwi for their development to be exempted from a ban on foreign speculators buying houses. The exemption for the Te Arai development was included in the legislation, but was later struck out by the Speaker of the House. In Parliament this afternoon, Mr Jones said he got a call from Sir John earlier this year and agreed to meet with him and those involved with the development.
Present at that meeting were members from the Te Uri o Hauhapu, Mr John Darby, and the US billionaire, Mr Rick Kane. I'm disappointed that the latter's name has been traduced by the opposition in the House. I had never heard of the man's name until I was encouraged to meet him by the former Prime Minister, Right Honourable John Key.
Shane Jones. A US federal judge has ruled that immigration agents can no longer separate parents and children caught crossing the border from Mexico illegally and must work to reunite families that were split up in custody. The ruling in San Diego came in a lawsuit filed over the family separations by the American Civil Liberties Union. From Washington, here's our correspondent, Harry Horton.
The order requires the US government to reunite almost all children under 5 with their parents within 14 days and older children within 30 days. The Trump administration had urged the judge not to make the ruling, arguing an executive order signed by President Trump last week largely addressed concerns. The judge disagreed, saying the government had no system in place to properly account for migrant children. US officials say they're working on reuniting families, but more than 2,000 children remain separated from their families, kept in holding cells, warehouses and foster homes. Harry Horton, Washington.
People have said their final goodbyes to the former Maori Affairs Minister Koro Weteri, who was buried today in Te Kuiti. More than 500 gathered at Turanga Waiwai in Ngaroa Wahia this morning for a funeral service for Mr Weteri, who died of cancer on Saturday. Our Māori news correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin was there.
With whānau surrounding the casket, Koro Weteri's body left Turanga Waiwai Marae this morning and was taken to Oparure Marae near Te Kuiti. More than 1,500 people poured through Turanga Waiwai over the past few days for his tangihanga. Today he was hailed as a grandfather of the Kingitanga and the people of Waikato Tainui and was remembered for his contribution to New Zealand. Mr Weteri was buried at a whānau urupa in Te Kuiti, the town he was born in 83 years ago. He's survived by his wife, 5 children and many mokopuna. Ko Lee Marama McLaughlin, tēnei.
It's 6:06. The All Blacks captain Kieran Reid has declared himself ready for a return to Super Rugby after 7 months on the sidelines. Reid hasn't played since undergoing back surgery late last year, but played half a game for Counties Manukau against Tasman in a friendly match in Manarewa this afternoon. He grew up in the area, but the last time he pulled on a Counties Manukau jersey was in 2004 in a young development side. Reid says he was pleased his dad was also able to come along and watch him today.
Cool to play in front of Dad. I spent my life here growing up, and always took me along to growers and on the bank and that. So pretty cool to come back, and I think he was pretty proud today.
Kieran Reid says he hopes to play a part in the Crusaders match against the Highlanders next week in Christchurch. Concentrating on themselves rather than worrying about the opposition is the key to the Northern Mystics improving on their 4-win, 4-loss record in the ANZ Netball Premiership, says goal shooter Bailey Mears. The Mystics are the only team to have beaten competition leaders Pulse and sit in 4th place. Tonight they play the 5th placed Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic in Hamilton, and Mears says they need to rely on the self-belief that's emerging in the side. The Breakers will play the Phoenix Suns NBA team as part of their build-up to the next Australian National Basketball League. The Breakers, along with Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth and Sydney, will participate in the NBA pre-season tournament in October. And that's the news.
Holding an intruder.
Mr. Skinner has been moved into a secure ward. It's very much like a hospital ward inside a jail or prison.
Upholding a travel ban.
A president with a very anti-immigrant stance. The Supreme Court is behind him on that message.
No longer withholding benefits.
It's just one of the many different measures that we're putting in place to try and improve the welfare system.
Holding your attention. Morning Report with Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the American philosopher and motorcycle mechanic who says skilled trades need brains and brawn. And after 10, Matt Young, who served 3 tours in Iraq as a Marine infantryman and has written an unsparing memoir about what it did to him. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Western areas from Northland to Manawatu, including Taumaranui and Taihape, mainly fine. A few showers in western Northland spreading elsewhere tomorrow. The remainder of the North Island fine with frosts tomorrow morning. For all the South Island except southern Fiordland, Clutha and Southland, mainly fine and frosty. A few areas of cloud. For southern Fiordland, Clutha and Southland, as well as the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. RNZ National, it's 6:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And Anna Thomas. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. We are going to return to this terrible collision in South Taranaki, the worst accident on the roads in New Zealand since 2005. 6 people are dead, 1 of them a baby and 2 are critically injured, 1 of them a child. 4 of the dead are understood to have been a group of elderly people travelling together in a car heading north from Waverley on State Highway 3. The driver of the southbound car they hit heading towards Waverley was killed along with a newborn baby. In the back of that car, an 8-year-old girl also sitting in the back and a female front seat passenger were critically injured and taken to Wellington and Waikato hospitals. There are real concerns about them. Central District Road Policing Manager Inspector David White briefed media just after 3:30 this afternoon.
So what happened this morning at Waverley is an absolute tragedy on our roads. 6 people have lost their lives and others are in hospital. This happened on a day like today. It's just unbelievable and just devastating for those involved.
What were the road conditions like at the time?
So today our priority is dealing with those at the scene and also providing some support and comfort to their families. And that's where our thoughts are as we speak now.
Well, what does it appear has happened?
I really want to thank those that were first on the scene for their prompt action coming across, which must have been an absolute horrible scene to come across. Particularly like to thank the first responders from St John, the fire service and our own staff who've had to deal with this today.
What is it like for police having to work at a scene like this?
Well, our thoughts are with the families, but for our staff, you know, we have feelings too. We'll deal with those involved today, but later on we will provide support for our staff that need it.
It's got to be pretty traumatic for your staff to be working with amongst 6 dead bodies.
Dealing with a crash like this today with 6 people dead is just devastating. There's no other words for it, really.
How does it appear the accident has happened?
Well, like our investigation's in really early stages, but I can say that it would appear the cars have collided head-on on the slight bend on the road.
There's been some talk of there being mowers on the road. Are you able to elaborate on that?
No, I don't.
4 elderly people in one car, and what was the other car? Was the blue car a family, or is it which car was the elderly?
So the car heading north from Waverley contained 4 elderly people. They're all deceased. The car heading into Waverley contained a male driver who's deceased, a front seat passenger who is in hospital, an 8-year-old in the back seat who was in hospital, and an infant in a car seat who is also deceased.
Do we know anything about where the people are from?
No, look, our investigation is really a focus at the scene here has been on covering the scene and getting hold of next of kin and dealing with that.
Where have the survivors been taken to?
I understand one went to Waikato and one's gone to Wellington, but...
How seriously are they injured?
My understanding is when they left the scene here, they were all stat 1, which is very seriously injured.
So there is potential others could die from this crash?
Yes.
Would speed have been a factor in this?
Well, that's too early to say. We've got a serious crash unit are investigating the scene as we speak, and that will come out through that investigation, and then, of course, there'll be a coroner and inquest in due course.
Central District Road Policing Manager Inspector David White talking to media at the scene at 3:30 this afternoon. Well, a former colleague of ours, he's now with the Wanganui Chronicle, excellent newspaper in the region. Jacob McSweeney was one of the first on the scene.
To give you an idea, it's about 5 minutes out of Waverley, 100-kilometre road, and it's one of those corners that gets you to slow down to about 85. So not a huge U-turn type corner, but a decent turn. And in the distance, we could see a number of helicopters. I think there were 3 by the end of the time that we were there, and 2 fire trucks, 3 ambulances, and police coming and going. A number of plainclothes police. We didn't get a shot of we couldn't get sight of the vehicles. One of our photographers flew over the top, and we got a sight from above. And I've had a look at those photos, and I can see it's quite clearly a head-on collision. I mean, 2 of these cars look like they look like Coca-Cola cans. They're just smashed.
And it was a very clear, blue, cold morning, right? So this is speculation, but classic ice weather. Yeah,
there was ice. When I woke up, there was ice all over the car. It was a really cold morning in the area, and I have heard that speculation about possibly black ice and other possible things, and there was a warning put out by police earlier this morning, just saying that there could be ice on the roads and to be very careful when you're driving. This happened at just after 11 a.m. So I don't know the particulars about how long ice sticks around it. It could well still be the case that it was there, or the police, the senior sergeant that we spoke to, Colin Wright, at the scene, he's a Whanganui guy, and he told us that they were still investigating at the time. They had a whole lot of PIB coming in from Palmerston North and Whanganui, so we're yet to find out what possibly caused this, but it's most certainly a head-on collision.
And Jacob, just to reiterate, because obviously this is very material, the corner it's not a sharp one. So an 85k limit is a fairly gentle kind of bend, isn't it? It's open road, it's farmland all around it, good visibility. So not a corner you would expect to be a high risk one.
No, not one. No, you're right. You wouldn't expect it to be. It is very open. You can see around the corner as you're approaching it, so you would be able to see another car that was coming on the other side of the road. If you sort of looked ahead a little bit, there's only a few hedge trees around, and it is open farmland, and it's relatively flat. The road does rise a little bit into the corner, and then when it goes around the corner, my understanding is it rises a little bit more and then drops. But it's an 85. It's a recommendation that you take the corner at 85, so that gives you an idea that it isn't a very harsh corner.
Jacob McSweeney, who was at the scene for the Wanganui Chronicle, he's a reporter with that newspaper. As we were talking then, we received a statement from police. State Highway 3 Taranaki Road reopens. State Highway 3 has reopened following a fatal crash near Waverley this morning. Police would like to thank motorists for their patience and cooperation as emergency services worked at the crash scene, so the road has reopened. It's 16 minutes past 6. For travellers and prospective migrants from several largely Muslim nations, the door to the United States slammed shut today, locked and bolted by the US Supreme Court. The ban prohibits most people from Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria and Yemen from entering the US. And despite widespread criticism, the court found that Donald Trump's travel restriction law fell squarely within the president's authority. The president hailed it as a personal victory. His opponents have vowed to keep fighting. Paul Hunter from CBC reports from Washington.
No ban, no wall. No ban, no wall.
As it's been since this saga began, there are all kinds of people in this country who oppose what Trump is doing. And in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, they vented their frustration on today's decision.
The Statue of Liberty is weeping today. Make no mistake, the Supreme Court has endorsed bigotry and Islamophobia.
It's immoral, it's disappointing, and it's wrong.
But, said the court, banning travel for people from certain countries is entirely within the power of the presidency. It's a huge win for Donald Trump, and he knows it.
A tremendous success, a tremendous victory for the American people and for our Constitution.
A key question addressed by the court, whether Trump's travel ban amounts to religious discrimination. Critics point to the words of candidate Trump in 2015.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Indeed, when President Trump enacted the first version of the travel ban, it was strictly for certain majority Muslim countries. The current ban, the one studied by the court, includes non-Muslim countries, Venezuela and North Korea. As well, it allows for countries to be taken off the list if they toughen their security provisions. Said the court today, the ban demonstrates, quote, a sufficient national security justification. And in effect, that the words of candidate Trump, and whatever his personal motivations, are irrelevant. Still, it was a divided decision, 5-4 along strictly ideological lines. Dissenting Justice Sonia Sotomayor likened the ban to the internment of Japanese Americans in World War II. And the ruling was slammed today by those insisting Trump is still targeting Muslims. Here's Nihad Awad from the Council on American Islamic Relations.
Unfortunately, as a nation, we still have a long way to go when it comes to equal protection and living the American ideals.
Today's decision is not the end.
Then again, for all the anger, Trump backers note he's effectively simply putting America first, as he said he would on the day he moved into the White House.
CBC's Paul Hunter with that report. 6:19, the government has unveiled proposals to cap interest and fees charged on loans in a bid to crack down on loan sharks preying on low-income communities. The Consumer Affairs Minister, Chris Whaafoe, released a discussion paper with options for capping borrowing costs as part of its review of consumer credit regulation. And as Emma Hatton reports, he hopes to have legislation before Parliament by the end of the year.
Cannons Creek local Donna Rawari knows firsthand the impact of taking out high-interest loans. Over several years, she took out thousands of dollars worth of loans through lenders and mobile truck shops. The interest and fees saw the total balloon to nearly 3 times the original loan. Donna says she felt she had no other choice because her bank wouldn't lend her money.
They sign you up and you get the goods before you have to pay, and that's the draw card, and that's where people don't realise, because it's there, and being desperate, hey, we do those sort of things. If you want to get out of the rut or trouble here, you've got to do that.
When Donna Rawari couldn't make the loan repayments, she says she was threatened with court action and was humiliated when debt collectors turned up at her house. She says any government clampdown needs to help those who don't speak English as a first language and who don't understand the ramifications of signing up for the loans.
There are a lot of people in our community that unfortunately don't have the support or cannot speak on their behalf. You know, I cry inside because they obviously don't understand what is being told to them, what their entitlements are. It's really sad.
2 years ago, Ms Rawari went to the Salvation Army for advice. Her budget advisor, Damien Hazelwood, says some clients take a lot longer to seek help.
It's probably pride. Some of them just find it hard to ask for help. And then others just think they can do it on their own. They think they can find a job or whatever and things will come right. And it takes a long time for them to sort of get to that point where they need to get the help.
The discussion paper found many people continue to be concerned about irresponsible and harmful lending practices, despite amendments to the law in 2015. Its suggested solutions include capping interest rates and fees, increasing licensing or registration for lenders, and strengthening enforcement and penalties. The Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister, Chris Whaafoe, says interest shouldn't amount to more than the original loan, so a $500 loan, for example, would have interest capped at $500.
You should be able to cap the interest at $500 as well, because that would max the amount that you pay back at roughly $1,000. At the moment, that interest rate can be whatever they want it to be, and that debt from $500 can spiral out to several thousand. If you're borrowing $500, paying back several thousand is going to take some time, and that's the kind of debt spiral that we're concerned about.
The Commerce Commission has been tasked with heavier policing of lenders, and Mr Whaafoe says now they just need the law to be behind them.
In the past, we have thought that there wasn't enough being done on the front line. This year, we've asked them to divert some more funding into frontline policing of this kind of behaviour to make sure that we can beef it up. But also, I think we have to have effective tools for them to use, and I don't think we've got that at the moment, which is why we're looking at beefing up the legislation.
Chris Whaafoe says the 2015 changes have failed to protect vulnerable borrowers, and the impact of predatory lending is being felt primarily by those already suffering in hardship. One social service provider that works with low-income families advised that 95% of its clients are carrying unaffordable debt. Submissions on the proposals in the discussion paper close on August the 1st. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
6:23. Auckland is cranking up their electric blankets and heaters to stay warm, and seriously cold temperatures for the city overnight have churned through near record amounts of power. A polar blast which brought snow to parts of the South Island yesterday moved north last night, plunging this city into colder temperatures than Queenstown. Take that, Queenstown. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person spoke to people about their frozen bird baths and chilly sleep on Auckland's coldest night in 3 years.
It was a chilly but stunning start to the day for much of the upper North Island as clear skies and freezing temperatures created blankets of frost. In Auckland, the icy conditions frosted up windscreens and, for New Lynn man Colin, frozen garden ornaments.
Neighbour's bird bath was frozen over and the birds were skating on the thing.
The temperature plummeted to minus 0.9 degrees in the Auckland suburb of Ardmore, while cloud-covered Queenstown Airport was much balmier at minus 0.3 degrees. Thawing out on the streets of Auckland today, people reflected on a freezing night.
Electric blankets on, heat pump, fireplace, the works, so yeah.
It was really freezing. My windows were like frosted and the house was damp and cold, I guess. I turned the heater on, but I can't turn it on for the whole night, so struggled last night.
I start off with an electric blanket, and I've got a nice wife that keeps me warm too.
Well, I had one blanket on, my air conditioning was on, and I kept it warm, and I slept with my dog. Yeah, I was quite cozy with it.
The energy company Vector says about 6 o'clock last night there was a huge surge in energy usage, 1,833 megawatts. Vector spokesman Andre Buerta says that was the network's second highest ever surge.
1,833 megawatts is roughly enough to power 450 Eden Parks all at once. So it's a huge amount of power.
But it wasn't just Auckland that froze. The temperature dipped to minus 2 degrees in Hamilton and 0 in parts of Bay of Plenty. In Taumaranui, where it was minus 3.4 degrees, Suzanne Mickelson says it froze the water in her outside taps. But it wasn't the coldest.
Even where there's been ice in the toilet, you break the ice when you go to the toilet. So it's not that cold.
Met Service meteorologist Angus Hines says last night's temperatures are far from record-breaking.
We've had relatively, the last few years, some quite warm winters, and this one is tracking to be a colder than average winter. But because the last few have been quite warm, it feels even cooler than that.
He says there'll be some reprieve from the chill tonight, but it won't last long.
We are expecting a few showers and associated cloud to roll through kind of the early hours of the morning, which will just stop that very final bit of cooling in the early hours of the morning. But then perhaps the next few nights beyond that, so Thursday night and then Friday night, looking like they might be pretty similar to today's.
Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake-Person, aho.
Let's head south from Auckland, although Anita was around the country there, really, wasn't she? An increase in the number of sightings of wallabies in Dunedin has officially alarmed people that they're moving outside of South Canterbury and into Otago and Southland. Yes, wallabies, they're a pest in New Zealand. Competing with livestock for food, they're quite voracious eaters of pasture, damaging crops and native bush, and they cost money to control. In Dunedin, the latest reported wallaby sighting is causing concern that they may be infiltrating areas of Otago. Our Otago Southland reporter, Tess Brunton, is having a look at this for us.
South Canterbury is a well-known stomping ground for wallabies, but in Otago, seeing a wallaby less than 15 kilometres from the Dunedin CBD is a major concern. Otago Regional Council Biosecurity Compliance Team Leader Richard Lord says wallaby sightings in the region have increased, with 116 reported sightings made in Otago since 2011, 5 of which were in the Dunedin area. More than 85 of those reports were made between 2016 and now.
We've seen other areas, especially in South Canterbury, where the numbers are really, really high. And once you've got them, you'll just never, ever easily get rid of them, that's for sure. There's a lot of huge cost involved in keeping wallabies under control.
The council even has an Otago Wallaby project aimed at containing the pests, which has cost ratepayers up to $600,000 over the past 2 years. The project requires farmers to kill wallabies on their property and report any sightings within 2 days. So far, there are no known wallaby breeding populations in Otago, but Richard Lord says a video allegedly showing a wallaby near 3 Mile Hill is particularly alarming.
Certainly in that area, it's a lot of, it's quite high altitude above Dunedin City, and there's a very, very dense cover, native bush, flax, and a lot of plantation forestry as well. But it's really just the type of cover means wallabies are very, very difficult to find.
Federated Farmers High Country Section Chairperson Simon Williamson says it was a major concern to find wallabies in North Otago.
The implications are huge. You just don't want them. They're a big animal. We call them the Canadian geese of the land. They foul as much as they eat. They're hard on fences. Stock, especially sheep, hate going where they are, where they've been. They foul ground up, and they eat a lot of food. They're a big animal and prolific breeders.
Mr Williamson says the impact they have should not be underestimated. He says work needs to be done to prevent wallabies from finding ways over the Waitaki River, a natural barrier for the pests.
You can't do enough, can you? They're spreading up through Burke's Pass now. They're spreading a lot further out of the ground that they originally were in. around South Canterbury and the Hunter Hills, and no one's very pleased about it.
Southland Regional Council Senior Biodiversity Officer David Burgess said wallabies aren't a major concern in the region, but a pest management strategy is in place. The last live sighting was about 2 years ago in central Invercargill.
We're doing as much monitoring as we can through regular contact with our partners in ORC and ECAN. We're obviously monitoring social media websites for any mention of wallabies being sighted or seen. And we're also looking into what's going to be the best method of control down here in terms of if they did establish, what are we going to do about it?
Mr Burgess says if a population was established, it would be a cost burden for the ratepayers and landowners. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Tess Brunton.
Just before we go tonight, a terrible, tragic day for news, but people delighted by Edward Gay's coverage of the Suarez and Chondo cocaine Diamante horse prior to the 6 o'clock news made people roar with laughter. Thank you, Eddie, as always. You are a delight. That is Checkpoint for this evening. We hope to have the pleasure of your company again tomorrow from 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police say the weather was clear and the road was dry at the time of a head-on collision which killed 6 people on State Highway 3 near Waverley this morning. The road has now opened. RNZ has revealed a scheme aimed at encouraging employers to take on apprentices will cost up to $63 million a year. Shane Jones says he was lobbied by Sir John Key on behalf of an American billionaire and 2 Northland iwi to exempt their development from a ban on foreign speculators. And a federal judge in the United States has ruled immigration agents can no longer separate parents and children caught crossing the border from Mexico illegally. Our next news and weather at 7.
On Gone Fishing today, there are good Westies, bad Westies, but sometimes it's a fine line.
Those kind of parties were like really good nights because you like totally